Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. Vladimir Putin said that the delivery of long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine could lead to the destruction of Russian-American relations, or at least to the rejection of those positive trends in the Russian-American dialogue that have emerged recently. These words of Putin can be considered an almost undisguised threat to his American counterpart Donald Trump, an attempt to put pressure on the United States not to provide Ukraine with qualitatively new military assistance. Earlier, Putin said that the appearance of a Tomahawk will not change the situation on the battlefield in any way. But now it is obvious that he is concerned about any real new supplies of weapons to Ukraine. And this gives away his main goal in the dialogue with Donald Trump. Putin's main task is to achieve the preservation of the status quo. In other words, so that the new American president does not impose new sanctions against the Russian Federation and refrains from military assistance to Ukraine. And it can be said that over the past months, Putin has managed to bring this plan to life. As you know, the administration of Donald Trump has not imposed any new serious sanctions against the Russian Federation, despite all the threats and warnings. Despite the statement that if a particular day fails to achieve a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front, then coordinated sanctions of the United States and the European Union may be imposed against Russia, in reality nothing happened. Now Donald Trump is talking about his readiness to impose sanctions against countries that buy Russian oil, or petroleum products that are produced from this oil, but only after similar decisions are made by the European Union. In other words, the situation still remains at an impasse, and Putin is quite satisfied with this. The same goes for military aid. The package that was approved by the US Congress during the tenure of Donald Trump's predecessor, Joseph Biden, as President of the United States, has actually been exhausted. And no proposals regarding new aid packages to Ukraine have been submitted to Congress. Moreover, leading administration officials and Donald Trump himself have repeatedly said that the United States should not finance the war in Ukraine, thereby opening up new strategic opportunities for Vladimir Putin. And despite the fact that in recent months the United States has declared its readiness to sell weapons to European countries, NATO members, which they can supply to the Ukrainian armed forces, this, of course, is a completely different quality of supplies than the almost continuous assistance that Ukraine received from the United States during the tenure of the President of the United States, Joseph Biden. The interval, as we remember, was exactly at the time when the Republicans in Congress, again coordinating their actions with the intentions of Donald Trump, then a candidate for the US presidency, blocked the allocation of a new aid package. Now the situation is starting to change, because Trump understands that Putin is leading him by the nose, and is using the Russian-American dialogue to continue the war in Ukraine. And at least in order to save his own political reputation on the issue of ending this war, Trump is trying, if not to choose a new tactic, then at least to declare this new tactic. That is why the topic of the supply of long-range Tomahawk missiles has recently been increasingly discussed by politicians and observers. Few people now understand what the real technical capabilities for such deliveries are. However, the fact that any long-range missiles that can hit strategically important objects for Russia on the sovereign territory of Russia itself, capable of changing the course of the war and demonstrating the helplessness of the Russian armed forces in front of Western technology, even after drones have become one of the guiding forces of this war, all this, of course, is not included in the plans of the Russian president. All this changes his idea that he could, through constant conversations about the possibility of ending the war and compliments to Donald Trump, hold out until at least 2029 year, continuing military actions against Ukraine, even against the background of negotiations on ending the war. After all, today we are in a situation that, one might say, Putin planned initially. The negotiation process can take place, but military actions are by no means an obstacle to this negotiation process. And now we see a different situation. Negotiations are practically frozen, military operations are continuing, and the United States would like to seat Putin together with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky at the table of real, not simulated negotiations by putting pressure on Russia. So far, it can be said that this is verbal pressure. So far, they are talking about tomahawks, but for Putin the most important thing is that this verbal pressure does not turn into the real intentions of the American administration. That is why he claims that if Trump delivers long-range weapons to Ukraine, it will not lead to his agreement to participate in real negotiations on ending the Russian-Ukrainian war, but on the contrary, will lead to his rejection of the Russian-American dialogue in all areas, including in those areas that may be for the US administration's priorities in the future are more important than the cessation of hostilities on the Russian-Ukrainian front. However, I have no confidence that such blackmail by the Russian president will take effect. As you know, Trump is just one of those politicians who believe that they should be blackmailed, not them. And in Vladimir Putin's statements that the delivery of tomahawks will stop the Russian-American dialogue, Trump may just see a weak spot in the position of the Russian president, see the fear that Putin feels before Western long-range weapons. If the Ukrainian armed forces receive not only the missiles themselves, but also the ability to hit these missiles at territories of the Russian Federation. And in this case, Putin can get the opposite result. The pressure on the Kremlin can only increase, and firm words, the United States and the countries of the European Union can move to real actions on the supply of long-range missiles, even if not a tomahawk. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it. Subscribe to my social networks for channels in Patreon, BAME, Coffee Donatello, which helps to develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature in YouTube itself. Global.